They believed they had you figured out. They looked at your patience and called it weakness. They looked at your kindness and labeled it dependence. They watched you forgive, communicate, and remain present, and they convinced themselves that you simply didn't see what was happening. In their mind, you were too trusting to notice the emotional distance, too hopeful to recognize the inconsistency, too invested to ever walk away. But what they failed to understand is that patience is not proof of ignorance. Love is not evidence of blindness. Sometimes the strongest people remain calm, not because they don't recognize the truth, but because they are giving someone every opportunity to become better. There is incredible power in understanding the difference between reacting and responding. Anyone can explode when they feel ignored. Anyone can slam the door the moment disappointment arrives, but it takes tremendous emotional strength to observe, to reflect, and to choose your actions with intention instead of emotion. That was your position all along. You weren't pretending everything was perfect. You simply understood that every relationship reaches moments where character is tested. You were watching, you were learning, you were paying attention to every inconsistency, every excuse, every withdrawal, and every moment when actions failed to match words. An avoidant often believes distance gives them control. They assume that if they pull away, the other person will chase harder. They expect emotional reactions because those reactions confirm the story they tell themselves, that people cannot live without them. But when someone quietly maintains their dignity, something unexpected happens. Their strategy no longer works. The silence they expected to fill with pursuit remains calm. The panic they expected from you never arrives. Instead, they begin facing something they rarely confront. Themselves. Your silence is not empty. It is full of self-respect. Every day you choose peace instead of pleading, you send a message that words could never communicate. You are saying, I know my value. I know what healthy love looks like. I refuse to negotiate my worth simply to keep someone comfortable. That message echoes louder than arguments ever could, because it forces another person to examine why your absence feels so different from what they expected. The remarkable truth is that emotionally aware people don't always reveal everything they know. Wisdom doesn't need constant announcements. You don't have to expose every manipulation the moment it happens. You don't have to win every disagreement or prove every point. Sometimes the greatest strength is allowing time to uncover reality naturally. Eventually, people's choices expose their intentions far more clearly than any accusation ever could. As time passes, an avoidant begins replaying moments differently. Conversations they dismissed suddenly carry new meaning. They remember the calm questions you asked instead of the emotional accusations you never made. They begin realizing that your observations were precise, your boundaries intentional, and your patience incredibly generous. What they once interpreted as innocence slowly reveals itself as emotional maturity. That realization can be deeply unsettling because it challenges the entire narrative they built. If you were never naive, then they can no longer convince themselves that they simply outsmarted you. Instead, they must accept a far more uncomfortable reality. You saw the patterns, understood the emotional walls, recognized the inconsistency, and still chose compassion over conflict. You weren't staying because you lacked awareness. You were staying because you believed people could grow when given honesty, grace, and opportunity. There comes a defining moment when they recognize that your departure wasn't impulsive. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't emotional exhaustion from one bad day. It was the final decision of someone who had patiently gathered enough evidence to know that continuing would require abandoning their own self-respect. That realization lands with extraordinary weight because it removes every excuse they once depended on. The greatest surprise for them is discovering that your peace was never created by their attention. It came from your own character. While they believed your happiness depended on their presence, you were quietly building a life rooted in confidence, purpose, emotional wisdom, and inner stability. When you finally walked away, you didn't collapse. You continued growing. That is what truly hits them hard, because they realized too late that the person they underestimated was the one who understood everything from the very beginning. There comes a moment in every relationship where truth quietly shifts the balance of power. It is not announced with loud words or dramatic confrontations. It arrives through clarity. The instant you stop questioning what you already know, everything changes. An avoidant often depends on uncertainty to maintain emotional control. As long as you are confused, waiting, hoping, or second guessing yourself, they believe they still hold the advantage. But the moment you see their patterns for what they are, that advantage disappears. Awareness becomes your greatest strength because it frees you from reacting emotionally and allows you to respond with wisdom. People who avoid emotional intimacy often expect others to remain trapped in endless cycles of explanation. They believe that if they withdraw long enough, offer just enough attention, or return at carefully chosen moments, the relationship will continue exactly as before. This pattern survives only when the other person fails to recognize it. Once you understand the cycle, however, it loses its influence. You stop chasing temporary moments of affection. You stop confusing inconsistency with mystery. You stop believing that mixed signals are signs of deep love. Instead, you begin recognizing that healthy relationships are built on consistency, honesty, and emotional responsibility. Awareness changes the questions you ask yourself. Instead of wondering, what did I do wrong? You begin asking, does this relationship reflect the respect I deserve? Instead of trying to earn someone's commitment, you begin evaluating whether they are capable of giving it. That shift is powerful because your focus moves away from seeking approval and toward protecting your peace. You are no longer trying to convince someone to value you. You are deciding whether their actions deserve continued access to your life. This quiet transformation is often invisible at first. An avoidant may continue behaving as though nothing has changed. They assume you will eventually return to familiar patterns of waiting and understanding. But something inside you has awakened. You are no longer driven by fear of losing the relationship. You are guided by respect for yourself. That difference cannot always be seen immediately, but it can certainly be felt. Your conversations become calmer. Your emotions become steadier. Your decisions become clearer. You no longer negotiate your boundaries simply because someone becomes temporarily available. One of the most unsettling experiences for an avoidant is realizing that you no longer need constant explanations. They are accustomed to controlling the narrative through ambiguity. When they disappear, they expect questions. When they return, they expect gratitude. When they offer partial effort, they expect acceptance. But awareness removes the power of ambiguity. You begin trusting observable behavior more than hopeful promises. You recognize that actions repeated over time reveal far more than carefully chosen words ever could. This change forces them into unfamiliar territory. They can no longer rely on your emotional uncertainty to maintain distance without consequences. Every excuse they once offered begins losing its effectiveness because you now recognize patterns instead of isolated incidents. You understand that one apology cannot erase months of inconsistency. One affectionate conversation cannot replace genuine emotional availability. One promise means very little without consistent action to support it. Perhaps the most powerful aspect of awareness is that it does not require revenge. You do not need to expose every contradiction or win every argument. You simply stop participating in dynamics that no longer align with your values. There is incredible strength in choosing silence over unnecessary conflict, boundaries over emotional exhaustion, and peace over constant persuasion. This is not about punishing another person. It is about refusing to abandon yourself in the hope that someone else will eventually change. As your awareness grows, your confidence becomes quieter but stronger. You stop measuring your worth by another person's ability to recognize it. You stop allowing delayed attention to feel like genuine commitment. You understand that real love does not leave you in a constant state of confusion. It creates security, trust, and emotional safety. When this understanding becomes part of who you are, the entire relationship changes because you are no longer responding from fear. You are responding from truth. That is when the power dynamic truly shifts. The person who once believed they could predict your reactions suddenly realizes they no longer can. They discover that you are no longer controlled by hope alone, but by wisdom gained through experience. And nothing is more difficult to manipulate than someone who has learned to trust their own discernment, honor their own value, and walk forward with unwavering clarity. One of the greatest misconceptions people have is believing that the loudest response creates the deepest impact. They think proving a point through endless arguments, emotional outbursts, or desperate attempts to be understood will finally make someone change. But life teaches a far more powerful lesson. Real influence is created through self-respect. When you choose dignity over desperation, you communicate something that words alone can never express. An avoidant may ignore your explanations, dismiss your emotions, or defend their behavior, but they cannot ignore the quiet confidence of someone who refuses to abandon their own worth. Self-respect begins the moment you stop asking another person to treat you the way they should have chosen to from the beginning. It is recognizing that love should never require you to beg for consistency, loyalty, or emotional presence. You were not created to spend your life convincing someone to see your value. Your value already exists. It is not increased by their approval, nor is it diminished by their inability to recognize it. The moment this truth settles into your heart, everything about the way you carry yourself begins to change. Many people remain trapped because they believe walking away means giving up. In reality, there is a profound difference between quitting and choosing peace. Quitting is driven by fear. Choosing peace is guided by wisdom. Sometimes the strongest act of love is not holding on tighter, but releasing what continually asks you to sacrifice your emotional well-being. This is not an act of bitterness. It is an act of faith. Faith that your future does not depend on someone else's willingness to grow. An avoidant often expects endless chances because they have become accustomed to people tolerating inconsistent behavior. They may assume that no matter how many times they withdraw, become emotionally unavailable, or offer only partial commitment, you will continue waiting. That expectation creates a false sense of security. But when your self-respect becomes stronger than your fear of losing them, their expectations are suddenly disrupted. They realize that your patience had limits, not because your love disappeared, but because your dignity refused to disappear with it. There is extraordinary power in leaving without hatred. Anyone can walk away while carrying resentment. It takes remarkable emotional maturity to leave with forgiveness while still maintaining firm boundaries. Forgiveness does not mean inviting unhealthy patterns back into your life. It means refusing to allow someone else's choices to poison your own spirit. When you release anger, you make room for purpose. When you release bitterness, you create space for growth. Your energy is no longer consumed by proving your value to someone who overlooked it. The lesson your self-respect teaches is far greater than any speech you could ever deliver. It demonstrates that love without boundaries eventually becomes self-neglect. It reminds others that kindness is not weakness, and compassion is not permission to be taken for granted. The people who once underestimated you begin realizing that your calmness was never surrender. It was discipline. Your patience was never ignorance. It was hope. Your departure was never revenge. It was the natural consequence of repeatedly choosing yourself after giving every reasonable opportunity for change. This kind of strength often creates reflection in those who never expected consequences. They begin replaying the moments they dismissed. They recognize the conversations where you asked for honesty instead of perfection. They remember the opportunities they were given to build trust rather than break it. Suddenly, they understand that they were never fighting against unrealistic expectations. They were being invited into a healthier way of loving, and they failed to accept that invitation. The most inspiring truth is that self-respect does more than change another person's perspective. It transforms your own life. It lifts your standards, strengthens your character, and aligns your decisions with your deepest values. You stop settling for temporary comfort and start pursuing lasting peace. You discover that confidence is not built by being chosen. It is built by choosing yourself when every part of you is tempted to settle for less. That is the kind of lesson that echoes far beyond one relationship, shaping every future connection with greater wisdom, greater courage, and a heart that knows its true worth. Growth has a remarkable way of revealing truths that were once hidden behind pride, fear, and emotional immaturity. Time has a way of stripping away excuses and leaving only reality. In the beginning, an avoidant may convince themselves that walking away was the easiest choice. They may believe they lost nothing significant because they were focused on protecting their own comfort rather than understanding the value of what stood before them. When someone is emotionally disconnected, they often measure relationships by how much pressure they feel instead of how much genuine love they receive. But as they begin to grow, that perspective starts to change, and what once seemed ordinary begins to appear extraordinarily rare. Emotional growth is rarely comfortable. It requires people to face the parts of themselves they spent years avoiding. It asks difficult questions that cannot be answered with blame or denial. Why did they withdraw when someone offered consistency? Why did they mistake vulnerability for weakness? Why did they push away the very person who created safety instead of chaos? These questions do not disappear simply because they are ignored. They wait patiently until life creates circumstances where honest reflection can no longer be avoided. As maturity develops, comparison naturally begins. They meet new people, experience different relationships, and gradually realize that not every connection offers the same level of patience, understanding, and genuine care. What they once overlooked becomes impossible to ignore. They begin remembering the little things that once felt ordinary. The conversations where they were heard without judgment, the encouragement they received during difficult moments, the loyalty that remained steady even when they were emotionally distant, and the grace that covered many of their imperfections. These memories become more meaningful because they are no longer viewed through the lens of emotional avoidance, but through the clarity of experience. One of life's greatest teachers is contrast. People often fail to appreciate light until they have spent enough time in darkness. They fail to recognize peace until they have lived with constant instability. They fail to value sincerity until they encounter manipulation. In the same way, an avoidant may only fully understand your value after experiencing relationships where emotional safety is missing. They begin realizing that what they once assumed would always be available was, in fact, something deeply uncommon. Regret often grows quietly. It does not always arrive with dramatic declarations or desperate attempts to reconnect. Sometimes it appears in ordinary moments: a familiar song, a meaningful place, a quiet evening without distractions, or a conversation that reminds them of the person they once had. These moments invite reflection, and reflection often uncovers truths that pride had buried. They begin recognizing that your presence brought stability rather than pressure, encouragement rather than control, and acceptance rather than impossible expectations. The hardest realization is understanding that the relationship did not end because love was absent. It ended because fear repeatedly stood in the way of love. Fear of vulnerability, fear of dependence, fear of being truly known. While they were busy protecting themselves from imagined pain, they unintentionally created the very loss they hoped to avoid. Emotional growth forces them to confront this painful irony. They recognize that the walls they believed would keep them safe also kept genuine love from reaching them. As this awareness deepens, the memories become more honest. They stop rewriting history to protect their ego. Instead of focusing only on your mistakes, they begin acknowledging your consistency, your effort, your patience, and your willingness to understand them even when they struggled to understand themselves. The story changes because they are no longer viewing the past through defensiveness. They are viewing it through maturity. Perhaps the greatest lesson growth teaches is that some opportunities are recognized only after they have passed. People often assume that valuable things can always be recovered whenever they decide they are ready. But life does not always work that way. Some people move forward, heal, and become stronger because they refuse to remain where they were not fully valued. Realizing that someone who genuinely cared has built a peaceful life without them can become one of the strongest mirrors of all. It reflects not only what was lost, but also what could have been if courage had replaced fear, honesty had replaced avoidance, and emotional growth had arrived before the opportunity quietly slipped away. The greatest transformation in your life does not happen when someone finally apologizes, changes, or comes back. It happens when you no longer need any of those things to feel complete. There is a level of freedom that cannot be purchased, borrowed, or given by another person. It is earned through healing, self-awareness, and the decision to stop placing your peace in someone else's hands. The moment you realize your happiness is your responsibility, you become unshakable. You are no longer living in reaction to another person's choices. You are living with purpose, direction, and quiet confidence, Many people believe that victory is watching someone regret losing them. They imagine satisfaction coming from seeing an avoidant finally recognize what they had. But that kind of victory is temporary because it still keeps your emotional world tied to someone else's actions. Real victory is much deeper. It is waking up without constantly checking for a message. It is going through your day without replaying old conversations. It is smiling because your joy is rooted in your own growth rather than someone else's attention. That is the kind of strength that lasts. Becoming unshakable does not mean you stop feeling emotions. It does not mean disappointment never visits your heart or that memories completely disappear. It means your emotions no longer control your decisions. You learn to acknowledge your feelings without allowing them to dictate your future. Pain becomes a teacher instead of a prison. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to build resilience, rather than another reason to lose yourself. This is how emotionally strong people are formed, not by avoiding hardship, but by refusing to let hardship define them. An avoidant often expects people to remain emotionally available indefinitely. They assume there will always be another chance, another conversation, another opportunity to reconnect whenever it becomes convenient. But personal growth changes everything. As you heal, your standards rise. You become more intentional about the people you allow into your life. You stop accepting inconsistency because loneliness no longer frightens you. You discover that being alone with peace is far healthier than being with someone who constantly creates emotional confusion. Every experience teaches you something valuable if you are willing to learn. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" you begin asking, "What has this experience prepared me for?" That simple change in perspective transforms pain into wisdom. You stop seeing yourself as someone who was rejected and start seeing yourself as someone who was refined. Every disappointment strengthens your ability to recognize authenticity. Every difficult season deepens your compassion without weakening your boundaries. Every lesson shapes you into someone who loves with both kindness and discernment. There is extraordinary confidence in no longer needing to prove your worth. You stop chasing validation because you understand that your value was never determined by another person's ability to appreciate it. The opinions of others lose their power when your identity is built on character instead of approval. You become secure enough to celebrate your own progress without waiting for applause. You become strong enough to walk away from situations that compromise your peace, even when your heart wishes things had turned out differently. The beautiful reality of becoming unshakable is that your focus shifts from changing others to becoming the best version of yourself. You invest your energy in your purpose, your health, your relationships, your dreams, and your personal growth. Instead of constantly looking backward, you become excited about what lies ahead. Your future becomes more important than your past. Your calling becomes greater than your disappointment. Your peace becomes more valuable than temporary emotional satisfaction. Ironically, this is often the moment when people who once underestimated you finally notice the change. They see someone who is no longer seeking approval, no longer waiting for permission to be happy, and no longer willing to settle for less than they deserve. Your confidence is no longer loud because it does not need to convince anyone. It is reflected in the calm way you carry yourself, the wisdom behind your choices, and the consistency with which you honor your values. Whether anyone returns or not no longer determines your direction, because your life has become anchored in something far greater than another person's acceptance. You have discovered that true power is not found in holding on to what tries to leave. It is found in becoming so deeply rooted in your purpose, your self-respect, and your inner peace that nothing outside of you has the ability to shake the foundation you have built within yourself. The greatest lesson you can carry from this journey is not that someone may one day realize your worth. The greatest lesson is realizing your worth before anyone else does. Life becomes extraordinary the moment you stop measuring your value by another person's ability to recognize it. Some people will understand your heart immediately. Others may only understand it after they have lost access to it. That is their journey, not yours. Your responsibility has never been to force awareness into someone who is unwilling to see. Your responsibility is to protect your peace, honor your values, and continue becoming the person you were created to be. Every experience, every disappointment, every unanswered question, and every difficult goodbye has been shaping you into someone wiser, stronger, and more emotionally free. Nothing you endured was wasted if it taught you to love yourself with the same commitment you once gave to others. Always remember this. Your kindness is not weakness. Your patience is not foolishness. Your forgiveness is not permission for repeated disrespect. These qualities are signs of strength when they are balanced with wisdom and healthy boundaries. The strongest people are not those who never experience heartbreak. They are the ones who refuse to let heartbreak harden their hearts or steal their purpose. If someone eventually realizes they underestimated you, let that realization belong to them. Do not pause your life waiting for an apology that may never come. Do not postpone your happiness hoping someone else will become the person you needed them to be. Keep moving forward. Keep growing. Keep building a life so meaningful that your joy is no longer connected to who stayed or who left. The future belongs to those who choose healing over resentment, purpose over regret, and faith over fear. One day you will look back and understand that what once felt like rejection was actually redirection. What felt like loss became preparation. What seemed like an ending became the beginning of the strongest version of yourself. And when that day comes, you will no longer seek validation from the people who failed to recognize your value because you will have discovered something infinitely more powerful. The unshakable confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and refusing to become less than that for anyone. Walk forward with courage. Walk forward with wisdom. Walk forward with peace. The best chapters of your life are not behind you. They are waiting for the person you are becoming today. Thank you for spending these moments investing in your growth and your future. If this message encouraged your heart, inspired your mind, or gave you a new perspective, remember to like this video, share it with someone who may need these words today, and subscribe for more empowering content designed to help you grow stronger every single day. Until we meet again, protect your peace, believe in your worth, and never stop becoming the best version of yourself. Take care of yourself, stay inspired, and goodbye.